Thanks for joining me. A great and packed show coming up tonight. The most bizarre war memorial I have seen in this country. Honestly, why did they even bother? What has happened to patriotism in this country? Barnaby Joyce will be here along to talk about that, and Woolies. Also tonight, Papua New Guinea, gone to the dogs since colonialism. Across the Chang Lei, who's over there covering the devastating riots that have broken out. And is the ABC the most racist media organisation in the country? Yet another ABC staffer accuses it of racism, this time for allegedly sacking her because of her Lebanese background. Is it true, or is something else going on? All that and my new segment every Thursday now, my tips, including a top whiskey and something for lovers of history and Vegemite. But first, Woolworths. I want to go back to this because this is another example of how woke corporates are not just hurting the country, not just abusing their power, they're also so out of touch that they're hurting their own business. As I said last night, Woolworths has banned Australia Day merchandise from its stores, and that's now blown up in their face, with the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, today calling for a boycott.
I think it's an outrage, to be honest, and I think people should boycott Woolworths. I would advise very strongly to take your business elsewhere, to go to IGA or Coles or Aldi. And I think until we get common sense out of a company like Woolworths, I don't think they should be supported by the public.
Now, the important thing to know about this decision is that it's political, and turns out to be hypocritical too. I'll show you. This is Woolworths saying it does not want you buying stuff in its shops that celebrates this country. This is a tweet it's sending to customers complaining about the ban. Check the last bit. We recognise the national holiday, but also respect that Australia Day means different things to different parts of the community, and want to show respect to all who come into our stores. Now, that's already obviously stupid, illogical and dishonest. Woolworths is not showing respect to the shoppers who do want to celebrate Australia Day. What it's doing is not tolerant at all. It's letting an intolerant, anti-Australia Day minority stop the rest of its customers from buying the merch that they want. Woolworths here is picking a side and dividing us. And it turns out they in fact pick a lot of sides, and usually ones that a lot of shoppers do not share or even appreciate. Most famously, of course, the Big W stores last year played ads promoting The Voice, until so many customers and staff complained they had to switch them off. Woolies back then also sold a book promoting The Voice, co-written by one of The Voice campaigners, Thomas Mayo. Now, in the end, The Voice was defeated. It was smashed by a vote of Australians 60% against to just 44%. Now, most of Woolies' own customers would have been dead against The Voice. Woolies was flogging it to them. It had been stuffing its politics down the throats of customers who didn't really like it. How woke is that? And now it's actually banning Australia Day merch for customers who really do want it. Now, what makes this even worse, what makes this so hypocritical, is that Woolworths is against celebrating Australia Day, but very much for celebrating all sorts of other minority causes, including divisive ones. For instance, it is promoting the race-based NAIDOC Week, the week of the National Aborigines and Islanders Day Observance Committee. It promotes the Muslim Ramadan Festival. It promotes the Hindu Diwali Festival as well. It promotes the tribes of Australia, but not the country itself that gives us all a home. How suicidal is that? Disrespecting what unites us, celebrating what divides, that's how things fall apart. So I wonder who is driving this. Now, I meet people, business leaders particular here, and many seem to me to be of a cultural tribe of their own. Woke, keen to prove they're not just wicked, greedy capitalists, have got a social conscience, and also terrified of criticism of social media warriors because, if they get picked out of the bunch, that might hurt their chances of a board seat or a government position or something like that. Okay, it might be being unfair. Woolworths might be different. That said, on its board, for instance, is Holly Kramer, who is also a director of the Goods O'Loughlin Foundation, set up by activist ex-footballer Adam Goodes and Michael O'Loughlin. And Goodes, who was a strong backer of The Voice, is himself on the Woolworths First Nations Advisory Board. Note the political name, First Nations, borrowed from Canada. A board that is meant to advise Woolies on reconciling, although as you can see, it's actually dividing. Most of its members identify as Aboriginal when it seems to me they also have white ancestry, certainly most of them. Adam Goodes, for instance, is a father of British ancestry. So, why is Woolworths so keen on dividing people by race, when most of us have all sorts of races in us, or a lot of us do? Why is it pushing this divisive race politics and pushing it so hard that shoppers now cannot even buy merchandise celebrating this great democracy on its National Day, a democracy that benefits us all? That's not reconciling us. Here is one of our biggest companies yet again playing the bully and setting people against each other. So I say boycott Woolies. If they won't respect Australia, why should you support them? I myself am a loyal IGA customer, and I know that Coles is loyal to Australia. It's still selling Australian Day merch, as Liberal MP Garth Hamilton found last night. So I think that deserves your support, don't you? And switching to IGA or Coles is one way that you might think, I'm just a humble shopper, what can I do? Well, you know what you can do? Shop somewhere else and tell a supermarket giant to pull its head in. Not divide us, but unite. Now, there's so much trashing of Australia now that I reckon many people probably got too exhausted to fight back or even notice sometimes. And that's, of course, how the activists win. Now, even include in that, to my astonishment, one branch of the RSL, which represents people who actually fought for this country. You take this astonishing war memorial, the strangest I've seen in this country, that's just gone up in Melbourne's Endeavour Hills. Actually, it's no longer a war memorial, but a peace memorial. It reads this: "This memorial honours all those who have faced great dangers in the fight for freedom and independence for all nations and for all humanity." You see, it doesn't even mention Australia. I mean, it could be talking about Palestine for all you know. It goes on. "This monument stands as a permanent reminder of a great objective, a just and peaceful world for all." Now, that's so vague and unspecific that this memorial could be about just anyone on earth. On the back, I read that this was actually funded and supported by the Endeavour Hills community, the city of Casey, that figures, and the Dandenong RSL sub-branch. The Dandenong RSL, even though no Australian soldier or Australian sacrifice is even mentioned. Joining me as the man who brought this to my attention is Dean Hurlstone, who's president of Council Watch, which runs a ruler over councils that go crazy. Dean, thank you so much for your time. What's your problem with this memorial?
Thanks for having me, Andrew. It's just another example of yet another Melbourne council deciding to cancel anything that could possibly offend anyone. Assume there probably will be no words on our war memorials if we head down this path. It's dangerous, it's disrespectful, and, what next?
I don't understand why it couldn't just be a monument to Australians who've lost their lives defending the rest of us and our values. Why would that be called offensive? Why would that be seen as not worthy of special respect, special honour? At least it would then have a purpose.
Well, Andrew, we have a council system in Victoria that takes $12 billion of our money, your viewers' money, each year, and loves to waste that on consultants. So I have no doubt that Casey Council somehow probably had to outsource this to an expensively high-paid consultant to tell them what to put on the war memorial itself. And they probably came back with, we don't want to say anything offensive because how dare we? This is public money. But they've probably wasted a lot more money and upset a lot more people by doing it.
Look, I think you're probably right. Don't mention World War I because the Turks were on the other side. Don't mention World War II because the Germans were on the other side. Don't mention the Korean War because the Chinese were on the other side. Let's not mention any of that. I mean, but what does it tell you that such a memorial gets put up with even the support of the RSL?
It tells me that our councils are leading the charge. Now, obviously, this council probably invested most of the money or paid for it to actually put it up after it was damaged. Now, the issue that I have here is, who are these people? Are they the CEOs? They're certainly not always the councillors. And we know Casey Council doesn't have councillors. It's in administration. So after it was sacked. So what this tells us is very clearly, this is about the bureaucracy of local councils, those highly paid executives and CEOs who are running amok and inserting social policy into our communities without making sure that they've actually asked what the will of the people is. It is just the same, Andrew, as all of the conversations you've been having around Australia Day being cancelled by stealth. What councils are doing is they're not telling anyone that they're cancelling them. They're actually just dropping the words Australia Day out of all their material. And in some cases, we've seen councils say, we can no longer hold an Australia Day event, but what we can do is hold a January 26 event, because at least not using the words Australia Day will make it not
Correct.
offensive to Indigenous communities. Now, the problem I have with that is these bureaucrats are paid by our money. We don't get to see the decisions they make. They're shrouded in secrecy and controversy, obviously. And what we actually want is, we want the public to be asked when these major changes are made to policies that affect and upset and offend people who have died for this country, who have died for the freedoms that we actually get to enjoy. That's why, Andrew, on our website, councilwatch.com.au, we are running an Australia Day petition saying, councils, get your hands off Australia Day. Let it be a federal conversation. Go back to the rubbish roads, footpaths, parks and sporting facilities, and keep your nose out of things that we didn't give you permission to talk about.
Absolutely true. Just quickly, I noticed you've actually taken a pot shot at my council for not minding the War Memorial in Mornington, the Mornington Peninsula. It should look like this, pretty with flowers. Instead, it looks like, despite all the rain we've had, it looks like a bare piece of dirt in front of the memorial. Or it looked like that when you last saw it. What does that tell you?
That tells me that yet again, councils are so distracted, Andrew, that they're running off trying to figure out their place in a global context where they don't belong. They're so worried about motions for Gaza. They're so worried about other things. And certainly in the case of Mornington, this is the basics. These are the things that people pay their rates and just don't expect to have to look at and say, how are they missing that? Everybody walking past it can see they're not doing their job. What's the CEO and the staff doing? Sitting up in their ivory tower?
Absolutely.
Go for a walk.
Put. Yep. Look, if a country that can't respect its traditions, sacrifice, public duty, if you can't celebrate that, things will fall apart. In fact, I think we're starting to see it now. Dean Hurlston, thank you so much indeed for fighting back. Really appreciate that. Joining me now is Nationals frontbencher Barnaby Joyce, as Shadow Minister for Veterans Affairs and former Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby Joyce, a peace memorial in a Victorian council, backed by an RSL branch that honours all people who have faced great dangers in the fight for freedom of all countries, and doesn't single out Australians or even the conflicts that we've been involved in. I mean, wow. What do you make of this?
What's it there for? Boudica. Maybe Queen Boudica is represented in that memorial. But on a more serious note, what happens if those who are invading Australia, the Japanese Imperial Army, if they thought that, I'm sure there's some of them thought they were doing it for the betterment of the world, a peaceful transition to under Imperial Japan. The fact that we'd been enslaved as a people and destroyed, it seems to be irrelevant. I'm sure there were some people in fascist Germany who, for what bent and twisted ideas, they might have thought they were doing the world a favour. Are we representing them in the memorial? The memorials are supposed to represent the Australian people who died protecting Australia, fighting for our nation in conflicts against adversaries who completely were in the wrong, whether it was the Imperial Japanese, whether it was fascism, whether it was protecting Australia from communism. That's what war memorials are supposed to represent. Our nation, our blood, our people who went out and engaged with the enemy by day or by night, but regardless of season, weather or terrain. That's what war memorials are supposed to represent.
Well, talking about war memorials, what about the Australian War Memorial? By law, it's there to mark the sacrifice in wars for Australia, for the nation of Australia. In fact, now it's got a whole lot of exhibits about the so-called Aboriginal Wars of Resistance as well. I mean, it's right from the top. The rod is starting right from the top.
Well, this is crazy. There is no Australian army that fought in a war in Australia against Aboriginal people. It just didn't happen, okay? It is not the truth. There was no general who was responsible for a conflict against Aboriginal people. It just did not happen. It is mythology, and it is false mythology to try and make this up. There were certainly skirmishes, there were police events, there were criminal events, but there was no war. And when people say there was a war, it is just belies either their understanding of history or their willingness to tell the truth. It did not happen. So to represent something in the War Memorial that did not happen, there was not one person, one Australian soldier in an Australian uniform that went out and fought against an Aboriginal army or was under the command of a general as part of a campaign. It just never happened. So why do we get sucked into this sort of lefty rubbish where we feel embarrassed about telling the truth? It just didn't happen, so it shouldn't be in the War Memorial.
There were actions against what was thought as criminal gangs at the time. I don't recall a war, but people are determined to make it look so. Meanwhile, Opposition Leader Peter Dutton, I mean, I tell you, Barnaby, it's going to be a theme this year. I think pushing back against the people trying to divide and trash Australia is really important, and it's going to gain ground because we're now seeing the fraying of this country. Opposition Leader Peter Dutton, he's called for a boycott of Woolworths stores after Woolworths banned the sale of merchandise for Australia Day. But I heard Agriculture Minister Murray Watt today. He thought this was outrageous. He thought, who would care if a major supermarket refuses to let shoppers celebrate Australia Day? Here he is.
Our government is focused on the war on inflation. Peter Dutton is always focused on a culture war. Peter Dutton is focused on putting the jobs of more than 200,000 workers at risk just so he can score a cheap political point on a radio station.
I mean, Murray Watt ended with an idiocy there. It's not putting the jobs of 200 people at Woolies, 200,000 at risk, because if you switch your custom to Coles, that's more jobs for Australia. So basically, it's a net win. What do you make of it all?
Oh, well, first of all, it's disgraceful that Woolworths have this belief. I don't believe it's the shareholders of Woolworths, and I don't believe it is it's obviously not the customers of Woolworths, but it's that little clique, that little special clique who, like me, probably went to the appropriate school in the appropriate suburb, and now they are fighting their culture war against Australia. They've decided that they would impose on their organisation that they will not be selling the merchandise to celebrate Australia's Day. This is the day where people who have gone beyond what they have to do as a citizen, where we respect and we reflect and we honour those people who have done so much for our nation, probably a lot more than a lot of those executives and senior apparatchiks and Woolworths have done for our nation. It also represents the fact that from a penal colony and from the Aboriginal people and a penal colony of convicts, we've created this incredible nation, the most egalitarian nation on earth, where you don't have to be born in the better suburbs to get to the top. And I think that's worth celebrating.
Barnaby, look, we keep getting told we're part of Asia, you've got to accept it. You look throughout Asia, right? Throughout Asia, with a couple of, maybe an exception, Japan, you would struggle. I dare say you wouldn't find a country as free and egalitarian and wealthy and secure and safe as Australia. I do not understand why we should be ashamed of this country.
Well, this is the thing. It's part of that cultural clique, the G&T politics at evening. That we've got to do something that's maybe makes us feel better about the fortunate circumstances we were born to and we live in, and we do it by trashing Australia, Day. What they are doing though is people are aware of it, and the more they try to trash Australia Day, the more that people will say, "No, you're not." And they'll stand up for it, and they'll absolutely make sure that people see their patriotism towards our nation, because that's the glue that holds us together. Your own little individual sort of causes where you decide that the way you're going to be recognised is to smash something up does not create a stronger nation. It destroys the nation we have. You don't see the French doing this to the Bastille Day, or even the Chinese. Their national day is the celebration of Mao coming in, who was responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people. Yet the same people will go to business functions with those Chinese businessmen and say what a wonderful outfit that is.
Yes.
Probably because there's a buck in it for them.
Barnaby, I think this country needs a really fundamental reevaluation of where it's going, and that's got to happen this year. Barnaby Joyce, thank you so much indeed for your time. After the break, here's a warning about lack of unity and about developing tribalism. Riots and murders in Papua New Guinea, extraordinary. I'm going to cross to Chang Lei, who's over there covering the devastating mayhem that's broken out. Yeah, Papua New Guinea is sure a warning against tribalism. No sense of national unity there. We should all be in this together, make sacrifice. None of that. Since the end of the colonial period, it's been a basket case. And now this, riots, arson, shooting, murders after police and other public servants found themselves underpaid thanks to a computer glitch. Police downed tools, which meant mass looting of shops and warehouses, including Chinese-owned ones. At least 2 Chinese were injured, which had Chinese diplomats, in fact, lodging a formal protest with the PNG government. Joining me from the capital, Port Moresby, is Sky News presenter Chang Lei. I mean, lovely to have you with us, Chang Lei, but I'm not sure why you decided to go holiday in PNG and now this. How serious is it?
Well, great to be on your show, Andrew. I do try to stay away from trouble these days, but it just so happens that my partner, Nick, is trying to start up a business here. And in fact, he's quite, hopeful of the changes taking place that will take this country onwards and upwards. But the events of the past 2 days, has got to put a question mark on many, a foreign investor. And how serious is this? More than the riots themselves, which are said to have cost an estimated, $1 billion in damages, not to mention the casualties, the human suffering, and also the taint on the national image. But more than that, it's what it says about the extent of social dysfunction and public discontent, and also the divide between the politicians and the average people who are just fed up, and or some, as people tell me, are greedy and aspirational. Yes, there is, subsistence living in PNG. People can always go back to the villages, but they do see in the cities what a small number of people have, and that drives them to, acts of such violence and greed. And it's a multi-layered problem, and it still remains to be seen how big this will escalate and, what political fallout it will have. Because what I'm hearing from the business community is that the government has been so preoccupied with politicking, with the vote of no confidence coming up very soon, that they'd forgotten about the forewarning that, there will be new taxes, higher taxes, and therefore civil servants will be feeling disgruntled. So it's, as you say, it is quite crazy here.
Yeah, more than a dozen deaths as well. I mean, it's so shocking. And then, you know, when they get those rumours and suddenly they're docked in pay, bang, we're told it was an accident. Probably it was, but I don't know. There was a really interesting dimension here that you've had China trying to get close to Papua New Guinea, which has raised security concerns for us, of course. But, you know, there's this latent anti-Chinese element in some parts of Melanesia. And China has now told the PNG government to take immediate steps to ensure the safety of Chinese nationals and businesses and severely punish those responsible for some of the looting we've seen of Chinese shops. What does this tell you?
Of course.
Where is this going?
Well, at the same time that China is trying to win over and increase its influence in the Pacific, it's also, this is, I guess, part of the typical propaganda that's aimed at assuring Chinese people that, you know, it is a more powerful and influential country, that it has leverage, you know, with lots of countries, and where possible, it will do all it can to protect its citizens. Whether that is, you know, actually real is another matter. But it's certainly part of a lot of the this is all part of the patriotism push that China has been putting in place the past decade, you know, to play up the image that China can, China will, China is powerful, especially where smaller and less influential countries are concerned. So, yes, it will lodge those formal complaints, and, you know, the same lines will be trotted out. You know, in this case, it's 2 minor injuries. And I think most Chinese investors who come here do not come in, you know, without expectations that there will be frustrations, there will be sometimes violence, there will be things out of the ordinary. That being said, what has happened is really tragic. And, you know, the word, I've just gotten off the phone with Shay Scavell, who heads up the PNG Manufacturers Council, and his word was heartbroken. He's heartbroken. He considers PNG his home, and the fact that these things have been allowed to happen while a government is yet to coordinate a response. And, you know, he's very, very exasperated that he's now having to talk to some ex-Fiji official consultant, and instead of talking to the government about what to do next. I mean, he heads up the business council. Everyone is so
This is becoming a common story. Don't forget, you know, the riots in Solomon Islands. The Solomon Islands, almost next door. Chinese businesses burnt down. China made a security agreement with the Solomon Islands government, which is on the take from Chinese money, to send over Chinese soldiers to help protect Chinese businesses, infiltrating in that way, or Chinese guards or police, whatever they want to be called. And I suspect the same sort of thing might happen here. Cheng Lei, keep safe. Thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. What an asset you are to Sky News. Thank you. Next, coming up, someone needs to tell the Prime Minister, you can talk big words, tough words to Iran, but in the end, when it hits the fan, we might have done better to actually send a naval ship. I'll tell you why after this with General Jack Keane. The Prime Minister says some tough words today about what the fascist Islamist government in Iran is doing to us and the world. But he won't lift a finger. Now, this is incredible, this story, because a bunch of rebels in Yemen, that's a country most people couldn't even find on a map, they're causing havoc with world trade and making imports even here more expensive. They're Islamist Houthi fighters. They're funded and armed by Iran. And the reason they're a problem is that Yemen, where they are, is at the gates of the Red Sea, leading to the Suez Canal, which is actually one of the world's most important sea routes. And they've been firing missiles and attack drones at ships there to punish Israel. They've even hijacked a couple of ships. Now, the US and other countries like Britain have had to send warships there to protect the freighters going past. But already traffic through the canal has been cut by anything up to 90% compared to a year ago, with ships taking the long and more expensive route around Africa instead for freight between Europe and Asia. Now, we trade mainly directly with Asia, so this doesn't hurt us so much, but it does affect us because the longer transport of the rest of the world, that means there's a shortage of containers, and that, of course, means more supply chain delays. Now, the Americans did ask us to send a ship to help shoot down these drones and missiles, protect the shipping, but it seems our Navy is so weak, so undermanned, and so ill-equipped that Albanese said we couldn't spare a single one. Can you imagine what China thinks looking at that? But Albanese today did attack Iran with words.
Iran should stop meddling, and Iran is playing a very destructive role in the region.
I tell you, if words were rockets, we'd be a world power. Joining me is Jack Keane, a retired four-star general who served as Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army. He's now Chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. General Keane, thanks so much for your time again. Look, how serious is this Houthi threat to shipping and the effects of this around the world?
Well, I think it's pretty serious, Andrew. I mean, they have actually expanded the war. I mean, obviously Israel and Hamas are fighting in the Gaza Strip, and there's been two serious expansions, certainly by Hezbollah into northern Israel, and there's 80,000 Israelis are displaced from northern Israel from their homes as a result of it. But then the second major expansion is clearly the Houthis, and quite remarkably, despite the fact there's a multinational force in the region trying to protect shipping and escort ships through the Red Sea, the reality is the Red Sea is the entrance and the exit from the Suez Canal, and virtually 50% of the shipping going through the Suez Canal is not taking place. They're going around the Horn of Africa, and that's impacting the global supply chain and to some extent the global economy. So this has been a stunning achievement by the Houthis to disrupt the global supply chain like this, and the United States and our allies have not been able to stop it. It is really quite remarkable.
I find it astonishing. This is not even a national army. It is a rebel army. I know it's got control now of the Yemen's capital, but seriously, General, how does a ragtag rebel army in a country few people could locate on a map able to cause this much damage without being bombed to smithereens? I mean, can't an American jet place a well-placed bomb somewhere?
Oh, there is absolutely no doubt about it. I mean, on American television, and radio, we have been commenting just about on a regular basis here for weeks that the United States and our allies would stand for this. I mean, we could take down their rockets, missiles, infrastructure, their radars that are helping to guide them, and their command and control in one night, maybe two at best, and not even threaten any of our pilots. And we know the locations of all of this. We have an administration here that is afraid to confront Iran because the Houthis are driven and ordered and supported by Iran. And they fear an escalation with Iran. And Iran knows it, and they're encouraging the Houthis to do more. It is an amazing sign of weakness on the part of the United States. I mean, I'm sad to say, but that is actually the case. And furthermore, for your audience to understand, Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria have been attacking U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria over 100 times since October the 7th. And we have not done much about it other than kill an Iranian-backed militia leader in Iraq, which was a good thing to do. But we really haven't done anything to stop the attacks, and we have been feeble and reluctant to deal with Iran directly. It is amazing what has taken place here. And it's just an incredible sign of weakness in our adversaries. Russia, North Korea, certainly China, President Xi is all seeing this play out right before their eyes, the kind of weakness that is on display, which incentivizes them, Andrew.
Oh, without a doubt. Well, if you're tearing your hair out about America's weakness, what about Australia? We couldn't even send one single ship to help this multinational fleet that's trying to stop these Houthi attacks on shipping there. We couldn't find one that could do the job. I mean, it's just astonishing. The war between Israel and Hamas, the Hamas terrorist group in Gaza, Hamas also funded by Iran, as you've noted. The US is putting pressure now on Israel to end this war, saying too many civilians are dying. How's this playing out?
Yeah, well, I think what is really happening here, certainly there has been significant pressure behind the scenes on the IDF and on Israel to change the nature of their operations, less air attacks, and also focus their ground operations more on leadership, high-value targets, and conducting raids as opposed to clearing operations. The Israelis are still conducting clearing operations, and there's also a pressure for a ceasefire coming from the international community. The United States has not been pressing for a permanent ceasefire, certainly a temporary one if we could get the hostages out. But I think what's at risk here, to be frank about it, Andrew, is whether Israel is going to succeed or not, because they have got to be free to conduct, particularly their ground operations, to clear out the Hamas fighters, their infrastructure, their rockets and the missiles, to clear out these tunnels. All of this will take time. And yes, it could go on for many more months to be able to do this systematically. If you're going to accomplish the objective, which Prime Minister Netanyahu has given his military, dismantle Hamas and prevent Hamas from governing in the Gaza Strip again. Well, to dismantle it means you really got to take down the fighters, the leaders, and their infrastructure and their tunnel complex. And I believe they run the very risk, Andrew, and I'm dead serious about this, of not winning this war if they're pulling back and this pressure continues and they're not able to conduct the comprehensive operations that are required here to accomplish the military objective.
General Jack Keane, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, great talking to you, Andrew. Look forward to the year coming.
After the break, is the ABC the most racist media organisation in the country? Yet another ABC staffer accuses it of racism. How many is this now? Plus my new segment, my tips, including a top whiskey and something for lovers of history and Vegemite. Take it from me is next. I have shocking news for you. The ABC, which campaigns so hard on race issues, see racists everywhere, is itself racist. Our national broadcaster is shockingly racist, if their own journalists and presenters are to be believed. I've never heard so many staff complaints at other organisations. Or is the ABC being gamed? This is a case of the revolution eating its own. Now, it is now being sued by Antoinette Lattouf. She's a Lebanese Australian, hyphenated, who was dumped as a fill-in radio host over Christmas for being actually an anti-Israel activist. Although she blames racism for the decision, saying it is disheartening to not only witness the horrendous treatment of people of colour by the ABC over the years, but to now personally and so publicly feel its wrath. Now, she's not the only one complaining, you see. In fact, there have been so many complaints from staff about ABC racism, the ABC in 2022 publicly apologised for all this racism in its newsrooms. It's been accused of racism by ABC presenter Dan Bushier, for instance. He identifies as Aboriginal. Presenter Stan Grant, he quit after accusing the ABC of institutional failure by not correcting the lies written about him by racists. Asian Australian reporter Jason Om, he said he'd been disappointed for years by the ABC's treatment. And the Sydney Morning Herald reported an Aboriginal staffer complaining for many Indigenous journalists that racism, bias and prejudice we've faced inside the ABC has been far more damaging than any abuse we've received online. Wow. Joining me is the panel, James McPherson and Liz Storer, both of the late debate here on Sky News at 10 p.m. You must watch it. James, now even the ABC, the national broadcaster, is it rotten with racism? Is that a sort of metaphor for the whole country? He's even apologised for it. Or is there something else going on?
Maybe they are racist, Andrew. I'm trying to think, when was the last time the ABC sacked a white heterosexual male with conservative leanings? They've never done that. Then again, they've never hired a white heterosexual male with conservative leanings. This situation is entirely predictable. The ABC have sown the wind, now they're reaping the whirlwind. They collected a group of people as much for their diversity as for their ability. So they've got a group of staff who see themselves at the top of the social justice pyramid, and you can't correct such people, you can't discipline such people because they see all of life through the prism of victimhood and entitlement. And so the moment you try to correct them, well, it's not their behaviour that's the problem. No, there must be something bigoted about you. And so when you employ people for their anti-racism, because they're anti-racist, it's all well and good until there's a disagreement, and next thing you know, they're accusing you of being racist.
But I think there's something else going on here on top of that. I should say the ABC is yet to file a response to these claims, but I've got some sympathy with other claims that have said the ABC is racist because I feel like I'm the token ethnic or whatever that they've picked, you know. And I wonder whether, in fact, it is racist in that way.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I can't even imagine the shock. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall when the ABC realised they actually had someone who was pro-Israel on their payroll. They couldn't fire this woman quick enough. But I do find this so hard to believe, Andrew, given it was just 6 months ago that the taxpayer forked out for the ABC's 30-page diversity, inclusion and belonging report. This was this massive plan to be rolled out over 3 years, complete with cultural guidance advisors yet to be appointed. Again, heaven knows how much that will set back the taxpayer. But the good news is Aussies do seem to be wisening up to the state propaganda arm that the ABC is. When you look at their radio share just over the last 3 years, in Melbourne, it's plummeted by 40%. Melbourne, you would think that's the epicenter of leftyism in the country, and plummeted by 30%, 35%, I should say, in Sydney. Those are Australia's two most major cities. What does that tell you? People are voting with their feet. They've had enough of this rubbish.
So right, you know. I think that is. But, you know, I wonder, James, whether this is in fact a case of the revolution eating its own. Yeah, a lot of us have been so falsely accused. You know, we're on the right, so by definition, we're supposedly racist. And we've been falsely accused of racism for so many years, we no longer pay any attention because we know it's rubbish. And so now the only people that you can galvanise and shock by calling them racist are people on the left, like the ABC, and it's now turned into a weapon to beat it round the head. I think it's very funny.
Yeah, the revolution always eats its own. The woke snake always ends up devouring its own tail, and that's exactly what we're seeing at the ABC. It's hilarious to watch. The only problem is we're paying for it.
That's true. But Liz, I want to go back to this Woolworths thing, right? It's the government, Murray Watts, who thought he had a clever line, Peter Dutton is focused on what sort of thong you can buy on Australia Day. But playing down the outrage of many Australians who I would assume too would include a lot of Labor voters about Woolworths saying you can't celebrate Australia Day by buying any product from us. Aldi now says it won't stock Australia Day merchandise as well. But, you know, you kind of say, well, that's a German company. What do you expect? Woolworths is Australian owned.
But is it? If you look at the two major shareholders of Woolworths, Andrew, they are BlackRock and Vanguard. Yes, those two very well-known, massive entities that basically control every company under the sun. If you can name one that they don't own, haven't got four paws in each pie, then I'll hold my breath, but I'll probably die. These guys are extremely powerful, and we know who's pulling the strings here. The anti-West, the self-loathing that is being rolled out across the West, Western countries, we see this all the time. We saw how Woolworths, that so passionately backed the yes vote last year, got whacked over the head for that too. Again, people need to vote with their feet. I was so heartened by Peter Dutton. Surely, I certainly can't remember, I don't know about you, but a politician that senior in our country calling for a boycott today of something as major as a huge supermarket chain in our nation. I cannot remember that ever happening before. This is significant. And what people need to realise now more than ever is we are the resistance. There's almost 26 million of us in this country. The lefties aren't the minority. They are the minority, rather. And the silent majority can stay silent but take their money elsewhere. Go to farmers' markets. We're always talking about how ripped off the farmers are in this country by this duopoly of Coles and Woolworths. We, the consumer, have the power with our dollars, and we can tell these global elites pulling the strings, yes, even at Woolworths, where they can shove their agenda.
You are so right to pull me up on how significant this is, because, James, I remember Scott Morrison telling me the one time he deigned to talk to me when he was Prime Minister, because I think that I was too right-wing, conservative. I mean, what a joke. That he wasn't going to engage in the culture wars. I think he said wouldn't put on an extra job, or he laughed it off. Wouldn't go, and the culture wars in the end destroyed him. But here's Peter Dutton getting stuck right in. Mistake or good?
Absolutely good. He'll ride all the way to the lodge on issues like this. I mean, can you believe Murray Watt? Murray Watt says the Labor Party, we're focused on fighting inflation. No, you're not. The RBA have been fighting inflation. The Labor Party have been fueling inflation. And then he accuses Peter Dutton of wasting time fighting the culture wars. Aren't the left hypocritical? They're the ones who dismantle the culture, and anyone who objects, they're the ones who are accused of fighting the culture wars.
Yes.
It's as plain as day. No one buys it. It's absolute rubbish. Peter Dutton is right to take a stand on this. Morrison disappointed his supporters because he refused to fight the culture wars. Like Liz said, there's 26 million of us who are dying for somebody to stand up for our country and fight the culture wars. Dutton will absolutely win on this one. Woolworths will lose, so will Aldi. Coles have come out and said, we will stock Australian items for Australia Day. Well, their marketing department
Coles.
just got an absolute free kick, didn't they?
Absolutely. Liz Storer, James McPherson, thank you both for your time. And now, take it from me. Look, it's a change to the show this year. I wanted to enjoy myself on a Thursday, my last show of the week. And if I could help you too, even better. So take it from me, some tips, things I see, read, even drink that I think is worth passing on. First, it's not so funny, is this book has just been republished. Cardinal Pell, The Media Pylon and Collective Guilt, with an extra chapter for this revised edition by Gerard Henderson. Now, I mention this because yesterday was a year since the death of Cardinal George Pell, and this book explains perfectly the witch hunt, the gross miscarriage of justice by police and judges and a jury that had him jailed for child sex crimes he could not possibly have committed until the High Court freed him, of course. Now, Gerard has now added an extra chapter that says so much about this rottenness at the ABC. He's named 120 journalists earlier in the book. They've painted George Pell as guilty. It was a total witch hunt. 40 of them from the ABC. Not one from the ABC said, oh, it might be innocent. Yet after the High Court cleared him, the ABC refused to interview any of the authors of 3 books explaining how Pell had been railroaded. Frank Brennan's book, Keith Windschuttle's book, and Gerard Henderson's, this one. Sorry, Windschuttle had 1 interview only. The others, none at all. Read the names of the guilty in this book. You'll enjoy that bit. Plus, more fun, I visited the Vegemite Museum last week in the Victorian country town of Beaufort, birthplace of the inventor of Vegemite, Cyril Callister, whose brother was a war hero in World War I. Now, like so many of our wonderful local museums, it's the work of volunteers. I always stop in on these things. And Lisa Robertson, on the right to this picture, she tells me she'd still like a few more really good examples of Vegemite history. She's got lots of them, you know, pots and all that. in her collection, which is in an abandoned service station. She's done up. I mean, more power to her. If you've got something, let us know, let her know, and hope to pass it on. But all power to these. And whiskey of the week is from my local distillery, Chief's Son. Now, you please try the peated malt edition. I highly recommend it. And the guy who started, by the way, won a trip to go and see Scotland from a distillery. Went there, saw it, thought he could do it better. That's it from me. I'll be back on Monday. Up next is an encore of Sky News documentary MH370, The Final Search.